Hey everybody, this is Rabbi David Fohrman. I had a chance to address you live at a West Coast convention not too long ago, and we're in strange times now, so there's no more live conventions, at least for now. So this will kind of have to do. So talking to you through the medium of video, I put together an animated video, which I'm really excited to be able to screen for you here. We have it in Aleph Beta, and there's a couple of other pieces in Aleph Beta that are related to it. So I suggest you kind of surf on over there after you're done learning as part of the OU convention. And you can check out some of the other pieces that are connected to this. But basically, this is a piece that you're going to see about the meaning of Shema. And when we normally think of Shema is the kind of thing that seems obvious in terms of what it really is. It's a declaration of our basic faith, this basic monotheistic idea that God is one. But as such, it's difficult to understand why it's part of prayer, right? What is a declaration of faith having to do with prayer? Maybe it would be something that would be good to say at the end of prayer, like as part of the Ani Mamins, maybe even at the beginning of prayer. But how is Shema itself part of our conversation with God every morning? The piece which you're about to see is something that I developed when I started thinking about something that really had nothing to do with Shema, one of those perennial science and Torah questions. What exactly were those strange days of creation that the book of Genesis talks about? And in thinking about that and looking carefully at some textual clues early on in Genesis, I developed some insights that I want to share with you about that perennial science and Torah question, but also about a very subjective inner spiritual question, really about the meaning of prayer and Shema's place in it. So come join me. Let's take a look. Hey folks, this is Rabbi David Fohrman, and today I wanted to talk to you about a really big part of Judaism that seems particularly difficult to relate to. You know, in terms of our daily or weekly routine, a lot of what I do, at least as an observant Jew every day, is, pretty relatable. The Sabbath, for example, once you get past some of the inconvenience of not driving your car around, not watching TV, you kind of find yourself welcoming that little breath of fresh air that's this weekly day of rest. It's a time to kind of center yourself, collect your thoughts, reach out to friends, really be present with family, connect to God. It's an amazing thing, very spiritual. Most of my friends, me included, we can relate to that very easily. We can say with real sincerity that we wouldn't trade the Sabbath experience for anything. We don't know how anybody lives without it. Chesed, helping the needy, being there for others in their times of crisis, makes you feel pretty good. It's a pretty relatable part of the religion, Learning Torah. Torah is amazing. Yeah, my 5th grade Hebrew teacher was awful. I'm sure many of us have had some not great experiences, but on the whole, Torah is amazing. It could be intellectually captivating. It could be spiritually stirring. It's pretty relatable also. But there is one part of daily religious life, and, speaking personally, at least for me, has always been a little bit more difficult to relate to, hard to really get into in a genuine way, and that actually is prayer, morning prayers in particular. Because, think of all the things that are barriers here. There's a language barrier for starters, and it's not just the fact that it's in Hebrew. Even if you know basic Hebrew, reading the Bible is one thing. Reading the prayers are poetry, and most of us don't use poetry as a matter of course in our daily lives. Prayer is like the only time when we're routinely saying poetry. Routine poetry seems like an oxymoron, but in prayer, that's what we do every day. And the real truth is, one of the things that makes morning prayer in particular difficult is, just the fact that it's in the morning at all. What if you're not really a morning person? I was never really a morning person. I have vivid memories of my dorm counselor in high school standing outside the door to my room, yelling at a still pretty much asleep David, "It's time to wake up already. You'll miss Zman Kriya Shema." Zman Kriya Shema, the time to say Shema in the morning. Yeah, the bane of my childhood existence. It turns out, folks, that there is a prescribed time by Jewish law to say the morning Shema every morning, and it, folks, is earlier than a sleeping teenager might like. I would stumble out of bed, half groggy, and sometimes you find yourself wondering to yourself, Does God really want this? Is he really into this? It just sounds so rigid that I have to wake up in the morning, every morning, really early by this prescribed time to say these words, Shema, this great declaration of faith as part of our morning prayers. Why does it have to be locked into this time? And while we're at it, it always seems strange to me why the Shema, this declaration of faith, was actually part of our morning prayers at all. What about it makes it prayer? It isn't obviously prayer. Prayer is this very subjective yearning. It's a very emotional, one-on-one kind of intimate dialogue with one's creator. And the declaration that God is one sounds like something you'd say on a witness stand in a trial. It's a statement of faith. What is it that requires prayer to include statements of faith? But even before you get to Kriyat Shema, take a look at the blessings that were designed by the rabbis to introduce Shema, the blessings that are known as Birchot Kriyat Shema, the blessings of Shema. Why are the Birchot Kriyat Shema part of the picture? Because, if I were to come up with the language for a bracha, a blessing of Kriyat Shema on my own, I might say something like, Blessed art thou, O God, who is one, who loves oneness, who hates two-ness, who wants everyone to know how one he is. Blessed are you who is one. And then I'd say Shema, the text from the Torah that says that. But if you actually look at the blessing we start Birchot Kriyat Shema with instead, the problem is it doesn't seem to have much to do with Shema. Here's the blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you, O God, Yotzer or uvorech hoshech, oseh shalom uvoreh et hakol, the creator of light, the creator of darkness. This is the main idea of the first blessing of Shema. And the problem is, look, I have no problem with blessing God for light and darkness every day. Light is a really good thing, and I'm really happy that we have it. It's the basis for all photosynthesis in the world. It creates warmth, all sorts of great things. But what does it have to do with Shema? Don't call this a bracha of Shema. Make it just one of the blessings that we bless God for in the morning when we talk about how great it is that we can walk, how great it is that we can talk. Let's talk about how great it is that you created light. Why is it that we have this whole other category of blessings of Shema, and this introduces it? This is one of the two great blessings of Shema. But let's say there's some sort of answer to that problem. I'm still not satisfied. Because look how this blessing progresses. It kind of seems to go off the rails. And the easiest way to see this is if you imagine that this isn't some sort of sacred text, but your daughter Susie came up with this for her 7th grade essay. Teacher said, write a proposed blessing of Shema. And here's Susie's blessing. And immediately after she blesses God for being the creator of light, she then goes on to say the following words, these from the actual blessings of Shema. Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim alei abrachamim, the God who causes light to shine upon the earth, upon all of the inhabitants of earth. And I'd say so far so good. Susie, that's a very nice blessing. Light is really great for the earth. It's really great for all the inhabitants of the earth. So far so good. But keep on reading in the blessing. Ubetuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh breshit. And in his goodness, the Lord renews every day, constantly, the work of creation. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem. Look at all of your things that you've made, O God. Kulam b'chachma asita. All of them have been done with such wisdom. Mal aharetz kinyanecha. How the world is full with all the things that you own. Hamelach hamramam levado ma'az. You, the king who was above it all from before. At this point, I'm thinking, Susie, what beautiful poetry. You're sweeping me away with your words. But when I actually stop to ask myself, but Susie, you've kind of gotten swept away with these ideas and we've just lost the whole train. Because this is a blessing of Shema, fine. And for some reason, the blessing of Shema is talking about how great it is that God created light. Now, if I want to finish off that blessing, get into the body text, right? In other words, if the topic sentence is, God, it's amazing that you made light, So you would expect the body text to relate directly to that topic sentence. So Susie, if I was writing the body text, I would say, light is an amazing thing. Think how bad it would be to not have it. It would be like 321 degrees minus 0 Kelvin. We'd all be freezing. That would be really, really bad. And if we had no light, there would be no life. I wouldn't be able to see and I'd be bumping into things. God, I hate bumping into things. Thank you for making light. That would be a really great blessing. But that's not Susie's blessing. Instead, Susie starts talking about God renewing and recreating creation every day. And I'm thinking to myself, Susie, what are you talking about? What do you even mean? God made creation once. He didn't make creation a zillion times every single day. So Susie explains, and by the way, this is the explanation that I was given in school. I wonder if you ever came across this language in school, what explanation you were given. But the explanation I was given was actually very abstract and very philosophical. And imagine Susie sat Mommy down and said, Mommy, here's what I mean. You see, it wasn't that God just created the world once, right? Because the truth is that God is like the energy behind the world. So if God would withdraw his energy from the world, it would all evaporate like nothing. Like there's a paragraph in Maimonides to this effect, and she shows me the paragraph. And I start nodding my head and I say, okay, I see what you're talking about. And Susie says, you see, if God would withdraw his power from creation, that tree over there would like evaporate. So the only reason why that tree is there, Mommy, is because really God didn't just create things once in the 6 days of creation. He's recreating that tree every day. Not just every day, every second, Mommy, that tree is being created. That wall, he's creating every last little thing all the time. And that's what we're talking about in this prayer. And I'm looking at little Susie and I say, little Susie, that is a very fascinating abstract concept, but I do not see that has anything to do with this blessing of Shema that you're making about light. What are you even talking about, Susie? So I have three basic questions about prayer. A, why is Shema part of prayer? It's just a declaration of faith. Where is the prayerful part of Shema, so to speak? 2, why is the blessing of Shema start off with a blessing about light? And 3, why does the blessing about light go off the rails to talk about creation and how great that God has all these things? What does that have to do with light? Okay, so how are we going to attack all this? What's our window in? One of the things that perplexed us was the Shema and the first blessing leading into it. And it seems to me that a logical place to begin might actually be to investigate the event that first blessing of Shema describes, namely God's creation of light on the first day of creation. So I want to take some time with you now to study the text of the Torah that describes that first day and the creation of light. And I think if we can understand that great original event better, everything else is actually going to come into focus. All the things that seem so strange and uninspiring, including why little old me as a groggy teenager ought to be stumbling out of bed to say Shema on time, all of those things might actually start to make some sense. Might actually start to be a little bit more meaningful. All right, let's try it. Okay, so here we are. We're back in the Bible, chapter 1, in the beginning and all that. We're at day 1 of creation, the day on which light gets created. And we're going to actually study this section of text together, you and me. First question to ask, I think, is a very broad one and a very difficult one. Why does the Torah go out of its way to describe this as a day of creation? What about these events of the first day actually make it a day? It happened over the space of 24 hours. Is that what the Torah is trying to force me to believe? And for that matter, why does the Torah insist on there being 6 of these things, 6 days of creation at all? Personally, it's actually one of the hardest questions to deal with as a Jew living in the modern world. somebody accosts you on the street and wants to get into an argument with you about why religion is infantile, irrational, you name it, and the first thing they're going to throw at you is, so you really believe the whole universe was created in what, 6 days? It sounds so childish to live in an era where there's, unanimous consent among scientists and everybody that the world is like really, really old, like billions of years old, 13.4 billion years old to be exact. And here you are clinging to this whole 6 days of creation thing. It just sounds so juvenile. And it's like you think, why did the Torah put me in this box? But it's not even a box that you're put into because you just happen to live in 2019. No matter when you lived, if you lived 300 years ago, you're still kind of in a box. You're still struggling with trying to understand these 6 days of creation. Imagine I'm living in 1692, right? And everyone's walking around in tights in Italy or something. And I'm leaning on the Leaning Tower of Pisa and wondering about creation. It still seems kind of strange to me that this big old world God just kind of threw together in 6 days. Imagine you just had God creating all these things and there was no mention of how long it took, no mention of the days. You wouldn't come running to me and say, Rabbi Fohrman, where are all the days? I don't see where all the days are. You wouldn't have said that, right? You wouldn't have thought that you needed these 6 days. So why does the Torah bother throwing them in? But it's worse than just the time frame that God takes to create the world. It's not just that 6 days is too short. It's that the days don't seem like days. I mean, according to the Torah itself, when did the sun get created? That's day 4. So could you please explain to me how I got 3 days before that? Like, how is there even supposed to be 3 days when there's no sun in the universe yet? At any point in history, you have a problem with that. I could be living in 300 BC and I struggle with that. So by way of dealing with this big problem, I'm going to actually make life worse for you for a moment by introducing more problems. Ready? Here we go. What would you say God was doing for the 6 days of creation? I mean, if you could just give it to me in a headline, literally one word, what would you say? What is God doing during the 6 days of creation? You'd say He's creating, right? I mean, that's what God's doing. And of course, He is creating, right? He's making something from nothing. He's putting stuff over here. He's moving it over there. He's dividing things. He's forming stuff. He's building on stuff. All of these are creative activities. That's what God is doing. But there is one thing that God is doing during the 6 days of creation that has nothing to do with creation. Can you find what it is? I'm going to actually read the verse for you. Vayomer Elokim, and the Lord declared, Yehi Or, let there be light. Vayehi Or, and there in fact was light. So far so good, very inspiring. Vayar Elokim et ha'or kitov, and God looked at the light, saw that it was good. Vayavdel Elokim ben ha'or ben ha'choshech, and He divided between light and darkness. And again, whatever this means in the cosmic sense of these words, we can understand that all of this has to do with creation, right? God looked at the light, decided it was good. It means that God evaluated what He created and decided to keep it. That's part of the creative process. Whenever you make something, you've got to sort of stand back and evaluate it, decide if it's good or not, decide whether you're going to keep it or get rid of it. So that's part of the creative process. Dividing between light and darkness. You want to make sure the light is good. You kind of put the darkness over here, the light over there. All of this is creative activity. But let's keep on reading. Vayikra Elokim la'or yom, v'lachoshech kara laila. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. That's the verse that you take your little red marker and you cross out some of that stuff and you say, I don't understand, why did you have to say that God named the light day and the darkness night? Why is God getting into the naming business? Indeed, if anybody names things later on in Genesis, it's Adam. Adam ends up naming all the animals. And indeed, in our life as human beings, that's one of the things we're really good at. Naming things, coming up with words for stuff. Heck, we created the Merriam-Webster dictionary with 30,000 words in it all by our lonesome selves. We're very good at coming up with names for things. We don't need God to do it. And here comes God and very helpfully says, oh, by the way, that or, that light, that's called day. And what if he hadn't said that? We wouldn't have figured it out. I mean, there's other things. We mentioned water here. God didn't have to name and say, oh, that's water. It's water. Human beings have that name, Vayavdel. God separated. We don't have to define separation. God's not dictionary making here, right? He's creating a universe. Why bother naming these things? Especially since the naming doesn't even make any sense. What are we saying? God called the light day, and that darkness he called night. Well, boys and girls, here's the problem. That light, most certainly, whatever it was, it's not actually day. How do you know it's not actually day? Because what is day? Day is when the sun comes up, goes through the sky, the sun sets, but that wasn't created yet. So how could you call that light day? The one thing that God decides to name, he's actually wrong about. It sounds so basic and so juvenile, but he's wrong. So why include this whole statement of fact as if it's fact when it's not really fact? And it has nothing to do with creation anyway. Why is it even here? Why do we hear about the stuff that God names? That is the next question I want to kind of throw at you. And now look at the next part of this verse. Vayihi erev vayivoker yom echad. And it was evening and it was morning. Now, each day, when the day is over, we hear Vayihi erev vayivoker yom X. And it was evening, it was morning, and that's the end of the day. But I just want to kind of throw out to you, almost playfully, why is it that the Torah settled on that convention? Especially because that isn't true either, right? Because evening, we all know what evening is. Evening seems to be when the sun goes down, right? And morning is when the sun goes up. And again, there's no sun. So why bother talking about the evening and the morning when it's really not evening and morning? Why do we even have that phrase? And again, if it wasn't there, you wouldn't be surprised. If it just said, okay, that was one day of creation, there was a second day of creation, and you didn't have that phrase, you wouldn't have complained to me. So what exactly is that adding to our understanding of things? Why is it even there? Okay, and I'd like to actually throw one final question into the mix over here, because after we have this mysterious Vayihi erev vayivoker, we've got Yom Echad. Now, how do you translate Yom Echad? I'm just looking over at my handy-dandy JPS translation, and it translates it as a first day. But that translation is actually manifestly wrong. The Torah doesn't actually call it the first day. That would have been Yom Rishon. But the Torah doesn't say Yom Rishon. It says Yom Echad, which literally, instead of meaning first day, means one day. Why say Yom Echad? So how do we make sense of that? Okay, so we've got these four basic problems. We've got the grand problem. Why are there even 6 days of creation at all? How am I even supposed to understand that? And then these ancillary problems. Why does God get involved in the naming business? Why do we hear about him naming the light day, the darkness night? And why do we hear about the evening and the morning for each day? And why does it say one day instead of the first day? Okay, so there is a crucial clue that I think we just got here in this perplexing phrase, Vayihi erev vayivoker yom echad, and I want to focus on that clue with you. It turns out that that phrase is used to describe the close of every day except for one. One day doesn't have that phrase. There is no, and it was evening and it was morning on that primal day of creation. And which day is that? It turns out it's the seventh day. It's Sabbath. Look at the Sabbath as described in Genesis 1. You will not find, and it was evening and it was morning on the Sabbath day. So my question for you is, why is it not there? Why is that the one day that doesn't have this phrase? What does it tell you about that phrase, Vayihi erev vayivoker, that it's not included on the Sabbath? How is the Sabbath different from all the other days? And the most obvious answer is that the Sabbath is the one day that nothing was created on. There's something about this notion of evening and morning that's associated with created things coming into the world. The clue is, and it was evening, it was morning, has some sort of association with creative activity. What's the meaning of that? So I'd like to try to sort of bring all of these ideas together and see if we can allow a theory to emerge from them. And let me give you a bit of an analogy to explain where it is that I'm going here. Imagine having a discussion with your fish, living in the fishbowl in your living room. Imagine this was a super intelligent fish, got an 800 on his verbal SATs, and you were chatting with him about your life. The fish knows nothing about your life. As a matter of fact, the only thing he knows anything about is life in the fishbowl in this water world. So the problem with you and fish having this discussion is you don't have a shared language. You'd kind of have to use fish language to talk to the fish because it's the only thing he knows. But there's nothing in fish language to describe something as simple as your living room couch because that's not part of his experience. Take that kind of analogy and square it, and you'll understand something of the difficulty of God talking to mankind about creation. Imagine you're God. You want to discuss creation with people. But the problem with discussing it is, what kind of shared language can you use? You can only use human language, but human language is adapted to the human world. To some extent, we might say that when God speaks of days of creation, he is borrowing a very basic experience that we humans are all privy to, the idea of a day, and using it to explain something which we are not privy to, the creation of the universe itself. And watch how it plays out. What we're going to do here is go back to the first day of creation. And the Torah actually talks about 4 things that happen on that first day. And I want to show you that those 4 things are this sort of very simple logical progression of God getting us used to this new kind of day that he's going to use to make everything so simple for us. Okay, let's kind of dive in, go back to the text in Genesis, and I'll show you how it works. What are like the 4 elements of day 1, right? First thing that happens in day 1 is everything's really chaotic, it's really dark, and then God does something. That's going to be element number 1. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, Vayhi Or. God says, let there be light, and then he goes, he thinks the light is good, he divides between the light and the darkness. Element number 2 is this naming thing that had puzzled us. Vayikra Elokim La'or Yom, V'lachoshech Kara Laila. God calls the light day, and he calls the darkness night. Element 3 is Vayihi Erev Vayivoker. God then says, so it was evening and it was morning. And element 4 is going to be the summary, Yom Echad, that's one day. I just made a day. So let's just go back and just watch that progression in slow motion. You'll see how kind of God's talking to the fish in the fishbowl. That's you and me. And he's just using fishbowl language to describe something very out there, very out of the fishbowl, creation itself. Okay, here we go. Slow motion through the 4 elements. Okay, so the first thing that happens is some cosmic thing that's really, really out there, very difficult to understand. No way poor fish in the fishbowl is going to understand this thing in the living room. And that is like the first thing that God creates in the universe, this or. Now, what actually was that or? I mean, just ask any scientist after 1920 and they'll give you some sort of explanation that'll make your head spin. There was a big bang, this cataclysmic explosion, bigger than anything. All of the energy in the universe that was there in a pinprick, and all of a sudden there's this cosmic inflation faster than the speed of light, and that energy is just pouring out, and the laws of physics aren't even quite there yet, and there's quantum this, and there's relativity that, and who knows what's flying. You've got to have a PhD from the University of Berlin to even walk in the dust of Einstein's feet to understand what's happening. And same for darkness, right? God created this darkness out there. What is that darkness? It's some kind of cosmic darkness. Just ask any astrophysicist from the last 30 years. Maybe it's dark energy or dark matter, this thing that physicists believe accounts for 4/5 of all of the matter in the universe, this matter that's impervious to light, that can't be seen under any circumstances. Maybe it's the singularities that lie at the core of black holes. Who knows what it is? But again, you need that PhD in physics from the year 2391 to understand what's really going on. So God says, look, let me just boil it down for you, make it real easy. Let's use fishbowl language for this, element number 1. Which brings us to element 2, God naming this mysterious light. He names it to help us wrap our minds around it.
you human beings here on Earth, right? One of the most basic aspects of your experience is, daytime, like when it's light outside, and nighttime when it's dark outside. Could we just agree to call this first mysterious cosmic burst of light and first mysterious darkness that enters into the world? Could we just agree to call that like daytime and nighttime? Vayikra Elokim la'or yom v'lachoshech kara layla. And God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. Element 3 is Vayihi Erev Vayihi Boker, God says. You see what we have, boys and girls? We've got an Erev on our hands. We've got a Boker on our hands. What is the definition of Erev? What's the definition of Boker? Erev means evening. Boker means dawn. What's dawn? Dawn is the coming of daytime. And Erev, evening, is the coming of nighttime. So God says, well, now that we've got a nighttime on our hands, now we've got a daytime on our hands. So when I made it all happen, when I made this burst of light come into the world, when I made this darkness come into the world, wouldn't you say that we had a dawn? Wouldn't you say that we have an evening? Because first they weren't there, and now they're there. They're coming into being. That's what evenings and dawns are. And now you see why that was such a perfect use of fishbowl language to describe the coming into being of these cosmic things, the great mysterious light and the great mysterious darkness. Because that's how you and I experience, in the deepest, most fundamental way, dawn and evening. What is it like to feel evening? Things are going away. I mean, technically, scientifically, they're not, right? You know that they're still around, but it feels like they're going away. There's this feeling of loss. That's why night is so scary. It's like nothing's around anymore. It's like the whole world is dead, right? And in the morning, it bursts back into life. It's like there's light again. It feels like the light just came there for the very first time. That's what morning feels like to us. That's what dawn feels like to us. And if you want to be sure that it feels that way, just get back to our earliest experiences of things sort of bursting into sight. You ever play peekaboo with a child? You know why they love peekaboo? Because deep down inside, right on the experiential level, when you close your eyes, it really feels like nothing is there. And then when you open your eyes and your parents are there, it feels like your parents have just burst into life again. It's the most delightful thing in the world. So you laugh. And here's the funny thing. It's not just kids that like playing peekaboo. Adults like playing peekaboo too. You know why? Because there's a little part of our souls that also don't believe deeply in object permanence. That's the part of our souls that allow us to go into denial about things that we can't see. If I can't see it, it's not there. It's the principle that allows you to go to bed at Friday night when there's all these dishes still in the sink and you drift blissfully off to sleep thinking it's not there. And in the morning, it's like, holy smokes, look at these dishes that are just burst into life that are there. Object permanence is something which we cognitively understand. Deep down in our experience, there's a sense that if it's not there, if I can't see it, it's gone. And that is the fundamental way that we experience daytime and nighttime. Nighttime is the time when things seem to go away. They seem to die. And all the great poets of the world talk about this. Read Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, all the associations of death with night. That's where it comes from, because it feels like it all goes away. And in the morning, it feels like it bursts back into life again. God says, guess what? There was a daytime and a morning time when the thing that you feel, you didn't just feel, it really was that way. Things really did come into being for the very first time. The very first day of creation. That's when our experience would have matched reality. And in that sense, these primal days of creation, that first day of creation, is more a day than any other day since. In all later days, there's only a feeling that things are gone. But in the very first day, it really wasn't there, and then it was there. And now, by the way, that point that we made earlier about evening and dawn happening with all the days except for Sabbath really makes sense, right? Because it really is associated with creativity. What God is really saying is this thing that I created, this light and this darkness, these two primordial elements that make up the universe, First they weren't there, and then they were there. And in that sense, you have an evening and a morning. So you see, evening and morning are the code words God uses for the coming into being of these central things. It's all about creation, just like we surmised from the absence of Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker on the Sabbath, the day in which nothing was created. So the first day of creation isn't a day in the sense that it's 24 hours or 12 hours. There's no claim about time. It's a day in the sense that something came into being. Light came into being. Okay, so we are finally up to element 4, the great climactic moment of day 1, in which God basically says, Yom Echad, there was a day here. That's what Yom Echad means. One day. It doesn't mean the first day. The point isn't to count the number of days right now. What God is hitting you over the head with is, do you see what there is? There's a day here. One complete day. In other words, this verse uses the word day to mean two different things. The first time was when God called the light day. The word day there really meant only half a day, just the light time part of the day. Then God says, let's put together the light time part of the day and the dark time part of the day, night, and together, guess what they make? They make a full day, one day. Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker, Yom Echad. God is actually being very sensitive to the fish in the fishbowl. The simplest, most intuitive thing you have in your world that you experience every day, i.e. the notion of a day, that's what I created. I created a day. You see how easy it is, fish? So the truth is, Yom Echad, this notion of one day, it's actually one of the best but also most subtle proofs of this theory that I'm suggesting to you. Because look at the progression here. First, we little fish in the fishbowl, we couldn't understand the cosmic awesomeness of the Big Bang or whatever that first burst of electromagnetic energy was. So God calls it light. Right? But then God extends the analogy and says, that light, that darkness, let's just call it day. And let's just call it night. Why? Because you fish, you experience daylight every morning, nighttime every evening. You get what they are, right? And then God extends the analogy still further. Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker, little fish. I just want you to know, this light, it came from nowhere. I created something out of nothing. And I know that's really abstract for you to think about something coming from nothingness. You don't quite get creation, something out of nothingness. Just think about it as Erev and Boker, the coming of night, the coming of dawn. How at night it feels like everything is gone, there's nothingness in the world. And at dawn, it feels like creation bursting into life anew. And so God then extends the analogy still further. Yom Echad. In that sense, little fish, it was one complete day. Just put the nothingness together with the somethingness, the nighttime together with the daytime, you know what you get? One complete day, right, fish? Now you know how I started making this little universe. Okay, I get it, but there's going to be the skeptic in you that is going to scream at me and say, all right, Fohrman, that's very nice, some fancy footwork there on the first day of creation, but how in the world do you expect to carry your theory through all 6 days of creation, right? Yeah, in day 1, light bursts into being, and before that it was dark, and then it was light, and I get it, how light was created, but how are all the other 6 days dawns and evenings? It's like light wasn't created 6 times in all these days, right? So how are those things evenings and mornings? How are those things fishbowl versions of days? There's no creation of light 6 times to go around here. Why are we getting 6 days? That's a very good question, and by way of answering it, I'd like to play a little version of a game show with you. There was a game show when I was growing up. It was called Family Feud. On Family Feud, Richard Dawson, I think it was, would survey 100 adults about simple questions, things like, what do you buy in a grocery store? And families on the game show would need to compete to see if they could figure out what the most popular survey answers were. Bread might be 51. 51 people said bread. That's what you buy in a grocery store. But 36 people said eggs and 21 people said milk. So I want to play a version of Family Feud with you around creation. The question I want to ask you is, how do you know it's morning? A very simple question, seemingly a question that has nothing to do with the 6 days of creation. How do you know it's morning? And let's imagine we surveyed 100 people, and there were 6 answers, and you had to come up with the 6 ways you know it's morning. What would you say? Okay, so here we are, we're playing Family Feud. On the left-hand side, we've got the Hatfield family. On the right-hand side, we've got the McCoys, and I, Richard Dawson, am moderating between you. First question goes to Hatfield. How do you know it's morning? Hatfield thinks about it for a while, Grandpa Hatfield, and says, I know, it's light outside, I can see. And I say, yes, Hatfield, that's exactly correct. That actually is number 1 on our survey, the most fundamental way you know it's morning. You can see there's light outside before it was dark. Excellent. But there's 5 more ways you know it's morning. What are the other 5 ways you know it's morning? Somebody on the McCoy side raises their hand and says, I know, my iPhone alarm goes off. Sorry, that doesn't count. We're not talking about you in 2019. We're talking about ways in which all humankind know it's morning. Even in 300 BC, how do you know it's morning? So somebody on the Hatfield side says, I know. I look up at the sky and it's blue. Excellent. Our survey says blue sky, that's number 2. And in fact, it is. It's a big, obvious thing. You look up in the sky, it's not dark anymore. It's blue. That's the second way you know it's morning. How else do you know it's morning? So somebody on the McCoy side says, well, I wake up. It's kind of true, right? There's this circadian rhythm. It wakes you up. It wakes you and all the other human beings up. Animals wake up in the morning too because of that circadian rhythm. Our survey says number 6. Yeah, it's a little subtle. It's out there in number 6, but it is one of the ways we know it's morning. But there's 3 more ways we know it's morning. What are the 3 other ways we know it's morning? You look outside and what do you see? So somebody on the Hatfield side says, the sun comes up. I see the actual disk of the sun. At night, I saw the moon and the stars, but in the morning, I see the disk of the sun, if it isn't foggy. And so Richard Dawson says, yes, that's exactly true. It's not just that there's light there in the world. There's actually the disk of the sun that you can see if it's not cloudy. That's another way that you know it's morning. Our survey says number 4. The crowd oohs and ahs. But there's still a couple other ways that you know it's morning. The game transfers over to the McCoy side. Somebody on the McCoy side is wildly raising their hand. I know it's morning. I hear the roosters. I hear the bird song. I hear the birds erupt in song. Yes, excellent. Our survey says number 5, 5th most popular way you know it's morning. So then Richard Dawson says, okay, great, but there's one more way you know it's morning. And silence falls over the Hatfields and McCoys until one guy with horn rimmed glasses slowly raises his hand and tentatively suggests, I don't know, I've got like a greenhouse at home and the plants seem to react to morning too. They sort of turn their leaves towards the light and towards the sun. And the bell rings and ding, 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 you've got the last way we know it's morning. Our survey says number 3, it's the plants. The plants know it's morning. They turn towards the sun. And now, boys and girls, why have we been playing Family Feud? The answer is, in these 6 answers of our survey, we've actually touched the 6 dawns of creation. God comes to you and says, now you know, you fish in the fishbowl, exactly what I did in this cosmic mystery called creation. It's really very simple. All of these things that you experience every morning, that it feels like they burst into life with the coming of light, there was a time in which it didn't just feel that way. It actually was. Your experience of dawn, that's just a pale shadow of the original 6 dawns, where these things really did burst into life. There wasn't any light, and then there was light. That's a day. That's the first day. The second thing our survey said, you look up in the sky, and the sky is blue, and first it looked like there wasn't any sky because it was black, and now it looks like there is sky because it's blue. God says, yeah, you get that? How it seems like there wasn't any sky? Well, that was actually reality in the most real day there was, the second day of creation, when first there wasn't any sky, and then there was. That's a Vayhi Era, Vayhi Boker. That's Yom Sheni. That's the second day. And then, you know how plants come to life in response to the sun? And at night it seems like they're just dormant and dead and not even really there. Well, there was a time when they weren't really there, and then they burst into life. It was the day with the most dayness of it all with reference to plants. That was the third day. You know how in the morning the sun rises, and it feels like the sun, full of vigor, is there bursting forth for the very first time? You know how at night, when the sun goes away, you wonder, some part of you, whether it's ever coming back, whether light is dying and the sun is dying? Imagine the very first experience of that night. Imagine how scared, how dark, how cold you'd feel. Is the sun ever coming back? And in the morning, it's there. Incredible. The sun is back. It's almost like it's rebirthed. Almost like it's rebirthed. But there was one day in which it really was like that, in which it was birth. The birth of the sun was the morning of day 4. Before that, there was no sun. It was dark. It was night for day 4. First no sun, then sun. No creation, then creation. Vayi Era, Vayi Voker, Yom Revi'i. And let's go to day 5. There's birds, right? In the morning, you hear birds. It seems like there were no birds during the night, and now all of a sudden it seems like the birds burst into life. Well, there was a day in which that was actually true. It was day 5 of creation. And day 6, you know how you wake up in the morning and you feel like you're coming to life again after this time that you felt like you were almost dead at night? That was day 6, the day when all of animals come to life again. And by the way, it really is true that in some way this is how we experience night. If you think about the drama of falling asleep at night, why is falling asleep something that we sometimes fight? There's a letting go process. Do you know that moment when you could sort of tell that you're drowsily falling off to sleep, but you can still catch yourself? And sometimes you do want to catch yourself because you wonder, where am I going? Where's my soul going? I'm going to this mysterious place where even though it happens every single night, I don't really know where it is. I don't know what happens during the nighttime of my life. My conscious mind doesn't know what happens. Will my conscious mind really relinquish that control? And you have to be able to do that. Otherwise, you suffer from insomnia. It is a little kind of encounter with death. When we experience night, we experience the closest thing we ever have to death, to non-existence. Everything feels like it's going away, including us. And when we come back, it feels like it's the very first morning. God gets in touch with those fundamental instincts of our experience and says, I want to explain creation, the most mysterious thing for you, using the most obvious intuitive terms that you could ever imagine. It was just days. It was just dawns. Because dawn isn't just about the coming of light time. It's about lots of things. So you fish in the fishbowl, just take your experience of dawn and divide it into 6 different experiences, and you got creation. 6 epochs in which the kinds of things that you see every morning when you first wake up, those things first burst into being in the most glorious mornings that ever were. Take all the ways you experience dawn, the reawakening of the sky into blue, the way the plant world wakes up, the way you see the disk of the sun emerge over the horizon, the way you hear bird song at sunrise, the way you and animals wake up every morning. All those 6 glorious events are how you experience every morning. There really was a kind of night with respect to these things. First, they weren't there, and then they were. And this seems like a really good place to clarify something I said before. Earlier, I suggested to you that God was using the idea of days almost as a fishbowl-style metaphor to describe these great epochs of creation. They help us fish understand what's going on out in the living room, out of the fishbowl. And that's true, but God's use of that fishbowl language isn't really metaphorical. If anything, I think the reverse is true. If anything, our own days, the ones you and I experience when we go to sleep and when we wake up, those days, they are in fact the metaphors for the 6 original days. The days that you and I experience, they're not days as truly as the first 6 were. Because on each day that you and I go through in our lives, our experience doesn't really match reality. It feels like things are going away at night and are being reborn in the morning, but it only feels that way. In reality, that's not what's happening. Well, God is telling us that there actually were 6 days when what you felt was happening really was happening. First, things actually weren't there, and then they really were, just like the way you experience it, just like the way you feel it. There were 6 epochs when creation just burst into being. They're the most real days one could possibly imagine. 13.4 billion years it took for all of these 6 great epochs to make themselves felt. God isn't talking about days in terms of 24 hours. He's talking about Vayihi Erev and Vayihi Boker in the most fundamental way that we experience Erev and Boker, the coming into being of things when before they weren't there. Remember, the 7th day doesn't have a Vayihi Erev Vayihi Boker because nothing came to being on the 7th day. But when things came to be, God says, first they were gone, and then they were there. Isn't that marvelous? Isn't that what you experience every single day? Well, there were 6 of those days. God takes 13.4 billion years and rolls it all up into a harmonious experience that we experience together every single day of our lives. All of a sudden, all of creation unfolds itself in just a matter of moments. It's almost as if God is conducting a Broadway show, is putting on the show called creation for us every single day, and you are witness to it. And that's the spiritual meaning of every morning, of waking up and smelling the freshness in the air, of hearing the birds, of seeing the sun, that feeling that you have that something special is happening. That feeling is rooted in a reality. God's doing the play over again. He's letting you touch creation. He's letting you be in on his secret. You get to watch it this time. All 6 dawns are happening every morning at once because there's a master conductor who's bringing all of these elements together in one symphonic burst of glory. And with all that in mind, I want to come back to this notion of prayer every morning. Where does this idea come from, perhaps, of praying every morning? And maybe it comes from sort of the spiritual meaning of every dawn. If you are tuned into this, then when you get up in the morning, what do you sort of want to do? It's like you see the symphony of the 6 dawns, and you just want to sing your praise to the master symphony composer. And that singing of praise takes an interesting kind of form. It takes a form of something we call literally Psukei de Zimra, songs of praise that begins with the words Baruch Sha'amar V'haya Olam. Blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being. Baruch Gozerim Kayem, Baruch Amer V'oseh, the one who is behind all of creation. Baruch Oseh Bereshit, blessed is the one who made all of creation. Why are we saying that? It's not just because it's an article of faith that we need to check off of our list. It's literally verses of song because there's something that's propelling me to sing. My simultaneous experience of the 6 dawns, of being part of creation every morning. And then, after Psukei de Zimra is done, we launch into something called Kriyat Shema. Why would we say Kriyat Shema? Why would we include it as part of prayer? It again is not just a declaration of faith, an antiseptic, objective testament to what it is that I happen to believe. It's much more personal than that. What have I just experienced? When God created the world in these 13.4 billion years, comprising these 6 grand epochs of creation that we describe as the 6 days, the 6 coming into beings of these 6 dawns. When God did that, what he's doing every single morning is letting you taste all of it in the space of just a few minutes. I'm hearing the first of the Birchot Kriyat Shema. God, through light, Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim alei abrachamim, through the light that he brings into the world, that light is a catalyst. It's a catalyst for everything else that comes after it. That light is the source of all life that gets created throughout those 6 days. Ubetuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tavin ma'aseh breshit. And in his graciousness, he lets us be a part of that. He renews that for us. Here you are, you're experiencing sunrise. The first thing that happens is that light begins to creep into the world. You look up in the sky, you see the turquoise blue of the dome of the sky, you hear the birds, you see the plants respond, you yourself wake up, the animals wake up, you see the disk of the sun emerge, and it all happens as if it's wonderfully choreographed. He recreates that play on Broadway every single day, all of creation, and it's happening at once. And from the fact that it happens at once, what is it that I see? What is it that I infer? I infer a silent conductor beyond it all, someone beyond the trees, someone beyond the sun, someone beyond the disk of the sky that's so beautiful and turquoise. It all coming together indicates orchestration, and orchestration indicates a conductor in charge of the orchestra. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem, kulam b'chachma asita. God, all of these things, they're so magisterial, that's so brilliant how it all comes together. Mal'ah ha'aretz kinenecha, it's all yours. Hamelach hamramam levado ma'az, the king that's above it all. A conductor is above the orchestra. The king is above creation. And what is this blessing really? It's a blessing that brings you right into Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. There's one force behind it all. Creation, the simultaneous recreation of all of these things, of all 6 dawns, every single day, testifies to the one creator that synchronizes it all, that puts it all together, who's the force behind it all. Creation isn't something we just have to believe in. It's something that our belief in it comes from our experience. Every morning we get a lesson in faith that doesn't come to our brains. It comes straight from our experience. It comes from waking up every morning and seeing what's going on outside the window. When you see that whole symphony come together, well, then you sing. If you think about Shema, if you think about prayer, what are we really doing? We're singing because all of nature sings. The sky testifies to the grandeur of the Creator. The plants, they open up and they face towards the light and they express themselves in joy in the morning. You have the birds bursting forth and literally singing. That's our experience of bird song, this cacophony of bird song. Every dawn, what are they doing but singing? Interestingly, there's scientific research that suggests that bird song is motivated by a certain chemical in the hypothalamus, which exists in humans too. It's not just birds that joyously want to sing in the morning. We too have a part of ourselves that joyously want to sing, that want to be a part of the symphony. Who are you, humans? You think you're set apart from creation? You're part of creation. Don't you want to take your place among the rest of created things and sing too to the Creator, the orchestrator of this all? That, I think, is what Shema is about. That is what Tefillah is about. That, I think, if we can begin to get in touch with our most primal response to dawn, that sense of wonder that we get every morning if you wake up early enough to begin to hear those birds, to begin to see that light, to be able to enjoy the turquoise of the sky, to see it all coming together, to just draw in your breath and say wow, and channel that wow. into a silent kind of prayer, a silent kind of Shema. If we can do that, we'll have been responding naturally as a human being ought to in the morning, and we will have prayed. The upshot of all this is dawn and morning, they aren't something to be missed in the hustle and bustle of getting the kids off to school and packing a lunch for work. No, there is amazement to be had in dawn. Every dawn is God letting us touch creation. The moment when God was nearest to us was at the very beginning. There's majesty in creation, but there's also tender love and care in creation too. And yeah, it happened a long, long time ago. But God bridges the eons for us and allows us a front row center seat to creation every single morning. When we pray in the morning, we try to tap into this opportunity that the divine creates for us in our lives every 24 hours. We try to reach back towards the God who reaches out to us in creation. And if, between shuttling the kids out the door, listening to the news, checking our email, checking Facebook, we can take some time alone with God to recognize these truths, to be amazed by them, to sing about them, we will have started our mornings by recognizing the divine gift that was waiting all night long to emerge and be unwrapped.
Hey folks, it is Rabbi Fohrman here again. Before you go, I wanted to invite you to continue our adventure here together through not just one, but actually two bonus audio tracks. The first is actually a conversation between me and Emmanuel Shalev, who is the producer for the video you just saw. And in this talk, we kind of explore the spiritual implications, really, of what we just learned. So if you're feeling intrigued by the presentation you just heard, but aren't quite sure how to integrate these ideas meaningfully into your life or into your prayers, this might actually be a good place to start. In the other audio track, I wanted to show you how the insights we uncovered about those 6 dawns help explain other prayers too, in particular the evening prayers and also the mysterious section of the Shemona Esrei known as Kedusha, having to do with this really esoteric concept of holiness. So I encourage you to try both or either of those audio tracks. They aren't really in any particular order, so you can take your pick. And if you do get a chance to listen, I'm intrigued to hear what you think. So let me know your thoughts in the comments if you get a chance. Happy listening.